Hey there, and welcome. I'm Anna Hartman, and this is Unreal Results, a podcast where I help you get better outcomes and gain the confidence that you can help anyone, even the most complex cases. Join me as I teach about the influence of the visceral organs and the nervous system on movement, pain, and injuries, all while shifting the paradigm of what whole body assessment and treatment really looks like. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Unreal Results podcast. I don't have like a real specific plan for today's podcast. I have some ideas in my head, but I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna start talking and see where it leads. And mainly because my brain is a little bit mush. Maybe not mush, but my brain feels tired. It's been a really busy month. I also just sat down to write my monthly email review, and it's crazy that March is over. I knew March would be like this. It's traditionally for me one of my busiest months of the year. Despite me wanting it to be, because typically March is one of my favorite months to be outside and enjoy the springtime, though it rained a lot in San Diego, so I guess I didn't really miss anything. But March is always busy. Pretty much as soon as I get done with my vacation in February, which I usually do right after the Super Bowl, I go to Hawaii for the whales. Usually I kind of hit the ground running, and even end up working on that vacation, because spring is when I launch all of my education stuff. And then also spring is when a lot of my athletes start getting back into training. It's really when the football players start working out again to get ready for OTAs. And then when my track and field athletes start transitioning into outdoor season. So it just ends up being busy for me. So on top of all of that normal busyness, I also, I taught that course in Miami at the beginning of the month, which was awesome, an in-person LTAP course. And then I also had my Revitalize mentorship alumni mastermind weekend, which was a 3-day in-person weekend, and with 10 of my alumni, and it was so amazing. I realized it was 2 weeks ago, and I recorded last week's podcast right after that, and I realized I didn't even talk about it, which is crazy, but I think my brain was just still a little overload from it. This past weekend, I was in Salt Lake City for a continuing education course for myself. I went to the Barral Institute class. I went to their new manual articular approach to the spine and pelvis. It was a great class. It was hard to sit through 3 days of learning after just such a busy month for me, kind of in my brain, but sort of once I settled in, it was really great. In a really great class, amazing teacher. The teacher was Lisa Brady Grant. She is a chiropractor. She lives in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. She was excellent. It's the first time I had her, and I've heard people rave about her before, but I'd never taken one of her classes, and so it was really cool to get to see why people raved about her. She's an excellent teacher. So that was really helpful. And that class it was great. It's a very mechanical based class. Obviously it was all about the spine and pelvis. It was all about joints for the most part. And was really great to see the osteopathic principles and treatment techniques and specificity and precision in such mechanical techniques. And it's very similar to how I was already sort of treating a lot of mechanical joint things. intuitively, I don't know if that's the right word, but just using these philosophies and treatment approaches in the joints. So it's nice to see it done and like be a little bit more precise about the anatomy. And that's really what it always comes down to, is understanding the anatomy even deeper and laying precision on top of that. So yeah, and then now I'm home for a day, and then I start back up with my travel to my athletes today, actually, in a few hours, and then we're just on the, on and off the road for the next while. Oh, this weekend I get back, I also teach locally at Yoga One San Diego. I teach anatomy for their 200-hour teacher training group. So we've got a full weekend ahead of me too. Yeah, so it was a crazy month. And it was great. I enjoyed every single one of those things. So, but I, zero regrets, Anyways, do you think I want to talk about sort of this concept of really what makes the techniques that the Brawl Institute teaches and the sort of framework or philosophies that they teach so powerful, and why it frustrates me to get comments and see people like bashing on it because of the lack of evidence of random controlled trials and that sort of thing. So if you're new to listening to me, I'm not a big like evidence-based practice champion. I think research is great. I think it's helpful, can be helpful, it's needed, but I also believe that the human organism is so interconnected, intrinsically. And connectedness makes it difficult to ever really have a clean research study to determine what's happening, because you can't isolate all of the different things. So with that said, like, I don't, I always take research with a grain of salt. Also, it's like, it's behind the times. There's things that people will be doing practically for 20 years before someone actually researches it and like quote unquote proves that it is doing what we think it's doing. And in my opinion, I'm like, why would I wait around for the evidence to prove that what I'm doing is working when the person in front of me can prove that's what I'm doing working? And it's a little bit of like semantics, because some people are just like, well, we're not arguing that it's working, we're just arguing on the mechanism of why it's working. A lot of the times I don't really care why it's working, to be honest. And I don't think a lot of people do, and I definitely don't think our patients do. And so that's always interesting. And then, the other thing with evidence-based, people get so focused, evidence-based practice police on the interwebs get so focused on like random controlled trials and meta-analyses and systematic reviews, and forgetting that there's other components to evidence-based practice. There's that, and then there is your anecdotal evidence, your like practice. It's the patient's past experiences and beliefs, and then also it's this other sort of foundational wing of science. It's anatomy, it's physiology, it's physics. And there isn't, honestly, there is not a ton of like actual research studies to support what we know is true in the anatomy. In fact, that's why there's still like research papers coming out on anatomical structures that we'd have not even named yet, right? And so for me, the foundation of everything I do always goes back to the anatomy. And the anatomy, for me, often is enough evidence and enough science to believe in a technique I do, or believe in an exercise I do, or help the client understand what's going on in their body. And I guess this is a big thing too, in terms of what I stress with people, is that because the anatomy, everything is connected, we were once one cell. Literally everything is connected. So the way you can connect it embryologically, you can connect it from a muscle or fascial standpoint, you could connect it from a nerve standpoint or vascular standpoint, you could connect it from a biomechanical standpoint, ground force reactions through the body. However you want to see how the body connects, there is a way for you to connect it. And however, the connection, whatever map you're using to view the body, is not the story of why something hurts or why something is not moving well. We will never, I think, truly know why it's happening. And I think the pain science literature supports that. I think most of us have a better understanding about pain than we did 20 years ago when I was in school. But understanding that pain is an output and pain has influences not just from the sensory information coming in from the body, the nociceptive information or the non-nociceptive sensory information, but it has to do with different chemicals. It has to do with your past experiences, your current state of your nervous system. There's so many layers to which pain has is influenced. And so when we often explain our treatments, or when a patient explains their treatments to someone, it is always us literally making up a story about how everything's connected. This is on my mind because during the mentorship alumni weekend, I worked on Lex Lancaster, or Brunel, when she was in town for the weekend. She is a physical therapist. She is also my, I call her my COO. She's my digital operations manager sort of thing. Anytime I need tech stuff and support on the back end things of tech for my business, Lex is the person I use. She's so freaking smart. She's so good at tech. But she's also a physical therapist. And she also teaches. She's an adjunct professor at a university, and she teaches PT. So it's not that she doesn't get it, right? Anyways, she was here. She also, on top of all those things, she also is a photographer. And so she does brand photography for businesses as well. And so I fly her out for this mastermind weekend because I think it's important for her, as someone that works in my business, to understand my business and understand what I'm teaching and understand what I have to offer. Plus, since she's a physical therapist, she's my target person, right? Physical therapists and athletic trainers, that's always who I'm wanting to speak to. And so I fly her out to basically just spend the weekend with me and my people, and also be learning, even though she doesn't necessarily treat clinically anymore. I want her sort of learning about the MovementREV philosophy and beliefs and methodology, so she can better help me on all the things for my online education business. And because she has this photography thing too, I'm like, hey, like, perfect, bring your camera out. You can also take pictures for me, which is so good to always have new photos. Plus, I can share them with the people that attended the course and give them photos of them doing clinical stuff too. So it's like a win-win for everyone. Anyways, she was coming out and she was having some shoulder pain, and she was supposed to be going up to LA to go play volleyball with the Movement Maestro for a few days. And she asked me to treat her while she was here. And I was like, absolutely, I'll treat you. And we kind of ran out of time for a full treatment session. You know, the days go by fast, especially when you're teaching all day long. But I was able to treat her Saturday night before she left Sunday. And I did just a very quick assessment using the LTAP on her. And it led me to the area around her liver and diaphragm, and then her cervical spine. And so I treated her, right? Well, I evaluated her shoulder, and she was limited. She had very high pain, and she had pain just lying on the table. And she was limited in a lot of ranges of motion: shoulder flexion, abduction, internal and external rotation, actually. Her glenohumeral joint was not inferior gliding or depressing when I was going through these ranges of motion. And I just stuck to like a pretty passive orthopedic assessment just for the sake of time. I felt like it gave me pretty adequate information of what was going on with her. And so I treated her based on where the LTAP directed me. And so I treated her. I did I think all I did was, I started to do a liver lift on her, but it was not, her body was not really letting me get in there. And so I was like, okay, it feels like her diaphragm is just like protecting this and so stiff that I think in order to even have any chance of mobilizing her liver, I need to treat her diaphragm. So we did this seated diaphragm technique, and really just felt her diaphragm just, it was so stiff. I've actually never felt such a stiff diaphragm before. And I feel like I've met a lot of stiff diaphragms. So anyways, I did this treatment on her, and it like slowly started to change in terms of the tissue quality. It wasn't so indurated, right? It wasn't so hard. And then I did like just a real simple liver technique in addition to that, a seated one, but not the liver lift like I was going to do in the beginning. If you don't know what a liver lift is, don't worry about it. It's just a very specific visceral manipulation technique. So really, I ended up just treating her diaphragm for the most part. And then I treated C4 on her neck. I just did a real simple little technique to sort of the facet joint and the, it's kind of hard, probably the joint, a little bit of the joint capsule, the facet joint capsule, and then like probably even a little bit of the actual joint capsule around the body of the vertebrae. And then I did real simple little brachial plexus glide. That's it. And then we rechecked her shoulder. And actually, I rechecked her shoulder between the diaphragm technique and the neck technique. And the majority of everything that was going wrong with her range of motion in her shoulder was corrected after just the diaphragm technique. So, and then I finished with the neck technique, and C4, if you listen to the last podcast, is another one of the areas of the spine that tends to be closely connected to liver issues because of the role the phrenic nerve plays as a sensory nerve to the liver, the area around the liver, sort of the joint capsule of the liver, the area of the peritoneum in that upper abdominal cavity, as well as in Glissen's capsule, which is the area that the diaphragm and the liver sort of connect to make a little joint capsule on the superior posterior border of the liver. So often the phrenic nerve, because of the information coming from that area, will kind of create an irritation at the nerve roots and cause some restrictions around the facet joints, around the foramen, around the actual joint capsule and tissues of C4 usually, but could be C3, C4, or C5, which those are the nerve roots of the phrenic nerve. So I did those and I rechecked her, and she had full range of motion, no pain. She has scoliosis, and her rib, her traditional rib hump, that's always noticeable on her, actually sort of shifted back into, quote unquote neutral. And so significant changes in just a 25-minute session of assessment and treatment, which was great. And then she went on to play volleyball the next day, the day after, with zero pain. Ended up doing like 4 strength training workouts, 2 of them primarily upper body. She PR'd on like bench and overhead press, all within that week of treatment. So what a win. And so she posted about this on Instagram, and just was posting about how grateful she was and like how mind-blowing it was to receive a treatment like that, and that she was encouraging people to, if you haven't check me out, and then also check out the LTAP level 1, because you can learn in that course how to figure out when you're directed to the liver. And then, of course, a evidence-based practice internet troll commented on her post about it and was like, why are you championing visceral manipulation? Haven't you read this one article and post, like, I don't even know what article it was, some like systematic review about visceral manipulation not being effective or not doing what it said it is. I don't even know what it was. Basically, and he tagged me on the post too. And so when I get people like that, I know there's no changing their mind. And they're definitely not going to change my mind. So to me, it's just like, he likes to argue and he thinks he knows better, and he is an angry elf. And so I don't even engage with people like that. I actually just block them and delete them. I couldn't delete delete it because it was her post and not mine. But I blocked him from me, and I didn't even reply. Lex did reply, however, and it was of course it was back and forth, because he's just trying to use someone, he's just trying to make himself look good. But it was funny to me, because I'm like, well, use one systematic review to totally say visceral manipulation didn't work. And he was like, oh, I'm not saying that you didn't get relief from the treatment, but you just can't say it was from mobilizing your liver. Now, it's one of those things that I'm like, shake my head, because I'm like, listen, dude, get off of your high horse. Evidence-based practice is more than studies. And if you look at the history of visceral manipulation, even though it's been around for hundreds of years, people have been doing work in the abdomen, treating the viscera functionally and manually for a long time. Even Jean-Pierre was not the first to do it. It's like, just to say that because there's been no studies that show it doesn't work is ridiculous. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and I thought that it was very important to point out, is that there are different methods of visceral manipulation, much like there's different methods of joint mobilization, right? And not all of them are created equal. They are not all the same. And Jean-Pierre Barral's, I would say, from what I have seen from people, is Jean-Pierre Barral's seems to be a lot more specific and a lot more precise, and he has done a lot of studying of the anatomy to make it so. With that said, Jean-Pierre is only in his 70s, and so I doubt that he started putting out this information in the first 2 to 3 decades of his life. And so if he's only in his 70s, he's only been putting out this information for maybe 30 years. Maybe more. Maybe 40 years. I don't know. But I'm like, how can you say his work doesn't work or it doesn't work when it's a different type of technique than other visceral manipulation techniques that maybe have been out there longer? And how do you know within one systematic review that, like, what were they even looking at? I'm not going to go read the review because I don't really care. I don't need the evidence that it works. But it's just funny to me how people just assume because one systematic review or one meta-analysis found that however many research articles didn't come to the same conclusion, that it doesn't work. And I'm not a researcher. I don't understand the statistics very well, but I do understand common sense. And I do understand that the human organism is much more complex than we could ever dial down in research. Because I have done research and I do know how hard it is to control a lot of variables. And there are so many variables going on in the body. Like how can you really determine that? So anyways, my whole point with this is not to complain, because I'm like, whatever, people are people. There's always gonna be dudes like that. And most of the time it is dudes, and I will not go down that whole rabbit hole. But it is just one of those things that we need to appreciate, that the anatomy that we know and work with on a regular basis is a very small amount of the actual anatomy that's going on in the body. And that the more you can study that and the more you can appreciate that and think about how you can feel the different qualities of texture in your hands with the treatments and be in very specific and precise locations with your treatment or with your exercises, whatever it may be, whatever technique it may be, that you could influence the organs and their mobility. And there has been research articles to show that some of these techniques do, in fact, change the ability of the organs and to move from the influence of the diaphragm. So, and to me, to be like, there's no way to prove, the mechanism of taking away shoulder pain wasn't truly treating the shoulder. I'm like, I just don't understand how someone could say that if you understood the anatomy. Because I'm fine. You can argue every day that what I'm treating, if I'm treating the liver, if I'm really having an effect on the liver or not, you can argue that every day, though some tests will tell you that yes, the function changes, the mobility changes. Whether I do or not, I don't know. But the area I was treating anatomically is innervated by the phrenic nerve. And when I'm speaking directly to the phrenic nerve, I'm going to change breath patterns. I'm going to change all of the messages at the nerve roots. And those nerve roots are shared with the nerves that go to the brachial plexus and are going to influence the entire upper extremity. Those nerve roots are also shared with the cervical plexus, which also influences the supraclavicular nerves, which is going to influence general shoulder pain. And then the reevaluation told me it changed things. So she appeared to have no inferior glide of the glenohumeral joint. Yet after treatment, not to the glenohumeral joint, then she had it. And so it's like, what changed? The messages to the joint changed, that there was no need for a protective mechanism anymore. The messages to the nerves that innervated the rotator cuff clearly changed and allowed for better inferior gliding depression of the glenohumeral joint. And this is all it's really about, is like, can we strategically figure out where we can do treatment to change the output in the joint that's causing pain, to determine, is that joint really the problem? Her shoulder pain, the joint was never really the problem. It appeared to be of what we knew previously, because lacking interrotation, lacking shoulder flexion. I'm sure if I looked actively, her scapula was probably not moving in full upward rotation. But those are problematic. They changed in an instant. So they were never actually the problem. It was not a stiff glenohumeral joint or a weak rotator cuff that was not creating that inferior glide. It was altered messages to those muscles from the nerves that was creating that biomechanical disadvantage, that dysfunction, if you will, that could or could not have been where her pain was coming from. We assume pain is coming from those dysfunctions, but that is not true, because like we talked about at the beginning, pain is not that simple. And also, because she could have had those dysfunctions and no pain, and vice versa, she could have had no dysfunctions and pain. The pain could have been simply a viscerogenic referral pattern, a viscerosomatic referral pattern, much like we see with pain from a heart attack, or pain from indigestion, or pain from surgical, like laparoscopic surgery to the gut. Like, your doctor will tell you, you will have intense shoulder pain after the surgery, more than likely, and it's just from the irritation to the peritoneum. So, which again is like, if you're not taking any research, if you're not taking into consideration all of those factors, how is any research then reliable? And how is any research fact of what is happening is actually happening? All research, no matter how much you control the variables when it comes to humans, is biased by the person doing the research, biased by the person doing the stats. I know enough about stats that I also know that there was just multiple ways you could run different stats to prove that your research was like good or not. So that doesn't necessarily mean it was really good. It means that you have a really smart stats person trying to find the right statistic to prove your hypothesis, to prove your bias. Which is what it is. Like, we operate in the world always with our own biases and our own belief system. But don't shit on a technique or shit on a theory of how things are connected when there's literally no way to separate it out and know exactly what the influence was. There is no way to know. Is her shoulder pain from the biomechanics that were going on wrong, or just the viscerogenic influence, or a combination of both, or nothing, right? Because then you can't even discredit the fact that, the psychological effect of like being cared for by another human, the co-regulation that happens in your nervous system. And this is my whole point, is I'm not against evidence. I'm not against practicing based on the evidence, but you also have to inherently see the bias that is in every single article that you've ever read and base your work on, because there is no way to account for all of the variables in the human body, period. So I guess that's it. That's it. It kind of leads into the other thing I had wanted to talk about, which is just about the nervous system and like the autonomic nervous system and how you can work with your patients to use that power of the autonomic nervous system and the power of the parasympathetic nervous system to facilitate the body's ability to heal itself. But we'll talk about that another day. So hopefully you enjoyed this rambling and maybe it gave you some food for thought. This is not necessarily me defending one thing or the other, but also just defending anatomy and defending being precise and specific with your treatments and being open to see that there is more influencing musculoskeletal problems than the biomechanics. Therefore, perhaps some of the evidence that we use to support what we do is even wrong in the first place because it never even considered the other things in the research paper. So that's it. I have to go head to the airport, jump on a plane. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'll chat with you next week.